brush off all the activities we've had throughout the day and bring ourselves to the sacred space of a Dharma discourse. And regardless, even if we're in our office, or in our living room, in our kitchen, wherever we may be, sitting in front of a computer or a phone, we still visualize and recognize this as an opportunity to study the Dharma. And in that way, this becomes a sacred space, an opportunity for us to move beyond our worldly desires. And so we treat this space with the respect and dignity of any sacred space, be it a temple or a monastery or anything like this. Try to keep our home life distractions out of our Dharma study. Now we want to set a strong motivation. We realize that we've come together this evening to study the Dharma, to talk about Bodhichitta, not for the benefit of ourselves alone, not for the happiness in this life, but so that we might benefit all sentient beings with the wisdom and the means and the methods to help others to the best of our ability, to realize our full potential and become Buddhas, because in that way, we can be of the greatest benefit to others. So just take a moment to strongly set your motivation that we're here today, not for ourselves, but for other beings. And with that, we'll offer verse of refuge in Bodhicitta. In the Buddha's Dharma and Sangha, until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest. To it all may I become Buddha in the Buddha's Dharma and Sangha. Until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest. To it all may I become Buddha in the Buddha's Dharma and Sangha. Until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest. To it all may I become Buddha. Great. Happy to be with you again this evening. And I'm happy that all of you could join me as well. It's a little thing, but the energy it takes to actually commit yourself to attending a Dharma class, I rejoice. It's really incredible, to be honest. There's so many things we could be doing with our time, wasting away in samsara. And whether we're brand new students or we're dedicated students, sometimes at the end of the day, especially for you, it's already 7 p.m. You need to kind of really rally a lot of motivation to go to a class. So I rejoice a whole lot that you're able to make it. It's really, really wonderful that all of us are together studying the Dharma, trying to improve our lives in such a way that we can be a benefit to others. Really, it's so special and it's so uncommon. I mean, just think of in your neighborhood alone, wherever you're staying right now, how many beings there are that aren't doing anything to work towards Buddhahood, to eliminate the suffering of others. Even just human beings. There's so many of them. And the fact that we have taken this time, we found the energy, we found the effort, the perseverance to come together. And not only are we studying the Dharma, but we do it with a joyful mind. We do it not, begrudgingly, but because this is where we want to be. It's a really uncommon thing. And so it's quite wonderful. So I'm really happy all of you could join me this evening. A little housekeeping quickly. Last week I had some internet connection problems. Hopefully I won't this time, but who knows? This is India, you know. Our rainy season finally started last week, and when the rainy season finally starts, everything gets a little bit suspect, you know. I got power yesterday afternoon, Monday afternoon, but we had no power since Thursday. So I went for 4 or 5 days without power. Um, and it came back yesterday, and we have a battery backup, which now my battery is fully charged. So even if we lose power, we've already lost it once this morning, but it came back. If we lose it, hopefully I'll be okay. I've got 3 different internet options. So if one of them goes down, I'll try another one. So if I disappear, just wait a minute. I'll try another connection, see what I can do. But you know, this is samsara. There's always going to be obstacles. So we do the best we can, right, to get over them. But so just thank you for sticking with me last week when that happened. Hopefully it won't happen again, but you never know. And so last week I had asked you to read a couple articles in the handout. One by Kyabje Rinpoche, and I hope that those were helpful and beneficial to you. Many times I study this material, every time I read one of these articles or something over again, there's always something new there, you know. There's always something that speaks to me in a new way. And you know, those articles by Kyabje Rinpoche, I've read them over and over again. And reading them again in preparation for this week's class, so it's so wonderful. I always get something new out of it. So I hope you did as well. And the homework for this weekend, if you want to do it, let's see, what I recommend is I'm going to in the good heart, not in the book, in the handout. And then also I'm going to send a link to an article by Lama Zopa Rinpoche online. If some of you might have the book Making Life Meaningful, it's one of the free books put out by the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive, but the whole thing is available online as well. So I recommend the first chapter of that, which I've sent a link to, and then also the 5th article in the handout for this course, which is called Practicing the Good Heart, also by Kyabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So those are both listed in the chat right now. So I do recommend you read those.
Venerable, we've had a request for last week's articles. If you have them nearby.
Do you mean like the PDF copy or just the list of what they were?
Links, if you have them, whatever you have available.
Yeah, sure. So last week's were not online. Last week's were all articles that are available in the class readings, which are available on the website. But I'm also going to put it in the chat right now. So there's a PDF coming to the chat, and that has all a bunch of the assigned readings. And then the ones for week 3. Called Generating the Body Mind by Kyabje Rinpoche, The Kindness of the Mother by Kyabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and The Nature of Compassion by Kyabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So those are what I recommended last week. Though all the So as we begin, remind ourselves that whenever we study the Dharma, we want to do so with an open mind. We want to not let our previous experiences or prejudices or our delusions stain what we are studying. And we want to, even if it's a topic we've studied over and over again, be open to learning and exploring something new. I know that I've found a lot of benefit from engaging in that kind of mindset. And we need to remember that as we study the Dharma, we need to maintain the 3 attitudes, the one of expansiveness, or the long view, recognizing that there's a lot of material and there's a lot of details, and we're not going to get them all the first time around, or the second, or the third, but we keep working at it, recognizing that slowly, we'll get all the pieces that we need, so we don't become discouraged. And then in addition to the long view, We have the so that's the long view. Then we have the expansive view. So not only are there a lot of details, but it'll take a long time, and that's okay. It'll take a lot of work. And then we have the relaxed view, that even though we know it'll take lifetimes, and even though there's so much material, the 84,000 teachings of the Buddha, we could listen to them every day and never be exhausted. We don't do it with a stressed heart, We're just relaxed. One of the Tibetans' most common thing you hear is just relax. No matter, slow down. Slow down, relax. No matter what the problem is, that's going to be the first thing. If you get stressed out about anything, or you're doing it, just slow down, relax. It's okay. Even a common expression when you're leaving someone's house, if you're leaving, they'll say to you, "Oh, kale pe," which means go slowly, leave slowly. And your response is, "Oh, kale should remain slowly, stay slowly," which is just to say go well, But so kale, relax, go slow. So we need this relaxed attitude. Otherwise, there is a mountain of material for us to cover, but if we don't have a relaxed attitude, it's just going to bounce off us. You know what I mean? We won't have any way to absorb it. So we need to have a heart that's absorbing this material we practice, and that happens through our study, our contemplation, and our meditation. None of that's going to work if we're stressed out all the time. It's going to be like throwing dry rice at the wall. So we need to relax and moisten, our minds to prepare them to receive Dharma.
Just an interesting observation. In Southern Africa, the Tswana language has a very similar go and remain exchange, and you don't see it in the Romance languages of Europe for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, language and the way, the way language interprets culture is very interesting. And so even in English, to say remain slowly doesn't make any sense, right? How can you remain with any slowly? Like one has to do with movement, one has to do with non-movement. But it shows what a culture prioritizes. And so the idea that going slow, kale, or being relaxed, it means everything about, it's so calming and so important. It shows what is prioritized in some ways. I mean, that's just Tibetan culture, which obviously is infused with the Dharma, but can be separate in some ways. But it's just living around Tibetans is something you hear a lot and you really take to heart. You need to have this relaxed view. Right now, my mother's going through chemotherapy. In February, she was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer, and she had some heavy surgery in February, and I was able to go to the States and kind of serve as her 24-hour caregiver for about 6 weeks while she recovered from the surgery. And now the cancer's come back in her spine, and so she's going through chemotherapy. And I was talking to my grade, and you're stressed out about it. It's not going to help her, and it's not going to help you, which is the easiest, most common advice, right? But just hearing your teacher say it, he's like, that's true. Relax, do what you need to do, but stressing out isn't going to help anyone. So we need to have a dealing with learning new Dharma topics and the many difficulties of our life.
But if you tell a woman to calm down,
a relaxed view. Okay. So, we're here to study Bodhicitta. That's this module we're working through together. And when I think about studying Bodhicitta, I think that answers for me, how can I fulfill my greatest potential? For me, Bodhicitta is the answer. Developing Bodhicitta. Because that means having a life that is dedicated to other sentient beings. And even though actual Bodhicitta is very hard to develop, all of the steps I take to slowly get there means that everything in my life is oriented towards serving other sentient beings. And that's the most profound thing I think I can do with my life, or any of us can. Never mind the goal of becoming Buddhas, eventually, to serve others. In this life, whatever we can do to serve others, is the most important thing we can do with our lives. And so trying to cultivate bodhicitta and go through the steps in the process is really important. And we serve others in different ways, you know? Not everyone has the same resources, the same opportunities. I have some friends who are doing retreat, and they do private retreat for months and months and months or years. And you say, well, how are you helping other beings by doing retreat? Well, for them, that's the opportunity for them to really work on their mind so that they can become closer and closer to Buddhahood. And I have others who do service work, charity work, and offer worldly help to sentient beings. And that's another opportunity, especially if done with a bodhicitta mind, not a selfish or worldly mind. So we all have different ways. I have friends who are teachers, friends who work in healthcare. My sister is a social worker or has a degree in social work, and she works as a counselor for a college. So we serve others in different ways. And we have to find the balance of what we're able to do in a worldly sense and in a spiritual sense. And by working to generate bodhicitta and to live with bodhicitta, to breathe with bodhicitta every moment, that lets us fulfill or unlock the greatest promise of our lives, our greatest potential. Because if we want happiness in this and future lives, for us and for all sentient beings, bodhicitta is the only way to get there. There are so many benefits of bodhicitta. Even just think, as we've been going through this class together now, just working to develop some compassion and bring these meditations we talked about into our everyday lives, see what benefits there have been. Just bringing a mind of compassion, or a mind of equanimity, or a mind recognizing all sentient beings as your mother. Bring that mind into your everyday life and you can see the benefits. Even with like my baby mind that's barely able to hold on to a meditation object for more than a split second. Even that, I see huge benefits. So if I can see such immense benefits with my limited practice, then of course actually generating bodhicitta is nothing but benefit. It's happiness in this life and happiness in the future life. Happiness for oneself, happiness for all sentient beings. Happiness that never ends, right? The never-ending bliss of Buddhahood all comes from bodhicitta. That's the root cause of Buddhahood. And one of the ways it brings so much happiness is because bodhicitta destroys the self-cherishing mind. Because really the self-cherishing mind is what is the cause of all of our unhappiness. The root of samsara, they say, is the self-grasping mind, the mind that doesn't understand the nature of reality and grasps at the self as if it were truly existent. But coming from that self-grasping mind is the self-cherishing mind, the mind that puts me above everyone else, my needs above everyone else. The mind that has its the 8 worldly dharmas as its generals, as it engages in the world, always seeking out my own pleasure, my own praise, compliments, a good reputation, seeking gain for myself and avoiding loss, avoiding displeasure, avoiding infamy, avoiding criticism. Anything we do motivated by one of those, by the self-cherishing mind, only leads to suffering. And yet we've done that over and over and over again for countless lifetimes. And the way to take that self-cherishing mind and totally expel it is through bodhicitta, form into an other cherishing mind, which is what bodhicitta does for us. The 8 worldly dharmas are so insidious. We don't realize how much they infiltrate every moment of our existence, and they just make our life miserable. So we have to always be on guard for them. And when we notice our minds going into a negative way, we take that moment and say, hey, what's the benefit of this harmful mind? We can use that moment to transform it. Just this last week, I had to attend a puja at my kanzen. So at the monastery, it's split up into house groups. And so there's 14 subsections in the monastery. They're called kanzens. And I had a puja to attend at my kanzen in the morning. I think at 5:30 or something like this. And it ended right before I had to attend a class. And so the puja ended, and instead of letting us leave, the kanzen disciplinarian thought he'd give a little bit of advice, basically critiquing all the people that didn't come to the puja is what most of the advice was. And whenever he gives this advice, I just get exasperated because I'm like, look, we're all here. Why are you giving this advice to us? And so he's giving this advice and going on and on. And I'm looking at my watch and I'm getting late for class. And I realize I'm so exasperated. I just spent an hour and a half offering prayers, trying to develop a small amount of merit. And now what do? I look to this monk who is one of my senior monks and who's in charge of my kanzen, and I have exasperation and frustration because I care about my own happiness. So no matter how long I sit there doing prayers, it takes a millisecond for my self-cherishing mind to say, no, I'm still in charge. But luckily, as I was sitting there, I realized
I'll just give them a few minutes.
what am I doing? Like, why am I with compassion? That creates more barriers for the self-cherishing mind to come. So it'll come less and less and less the more compassion we are able to develop and the more bodhicitta we're able to develop. But we need a stable mind to do this work. Okay, we can't have a mind that's always flitting left and right. So we need to work on mindfulness, which is just to say, achieve mindfulness meditation, trying to achieve calm abiding. Mind's always jumping from one object to another. We're not able to stay focused. How can we notice when we're being overcome by our delusions? How can we notice when our self-cherishing is taking the wheel? We need a mind that engages in analytical meditation as well, that studies the topics of Lama, that develop even in a tertiary way. So we need analytical meditation as well as stabilizing meditation combined with wisdom. And all those actually help us develop bodhicitta as well. So we're not practicing in isolation. Bodhicitta doesn't come out of nowhere. It needs all of these bits and pieces. All the parts of the path to enlightenment work together. Bodhicitta is a process. It's slow. And what we need to do is rejoice in any small progress you make. It's really important because it can be very easy to become discouraged, right? We talk about becoming a Buddha and realize that's so far out of my league. Never mind that. I look at teachers, who I study with, and no matter what topic you bring up, they'll have like the whole section memorized and they'll just have quotations that from books that they've read, 30, 40 years ago. And those ago, it's all just like right there for them. And for me, it's like such a struggle, right? So never mind Bodhicitta, just having the intellect of this life is really difficult. It seems so far out of reach. But every little baby step I make, I rejoice. So many lifetimes, not even thinking about others. The fact that we're attempting to develop compassion and bodhicitta in this life is really monumental. So we need to rejoice in every small amount of progress you make, because that is what helps us keep moving forward, right? That puts more gas in the tank, that rejoicing. And it's important to remember that bodhicitta, say Chibo Gyalten is one of the Kadampa Lamas, and he wrote a commentary on the 7 mind training, but instead, bodhicitta grows in the minds of those sentient beings, ordinary sentient beings, who possess all the fetters and all the bounds, all the chains of bondage. Right? We need so no matter how deluded our minds are, how many delusions we see, that is what we use to develop bodhicitta. Because we recognize those deluded minds and that suffering we experience, and that becomes our motivation to benefit others. They say that the Hinayana Arhats, right? They're not under the controls of the nature of reality, and it's blissful. And they'll remain in that equipoise for eons. And eventually, they develop great compassion and bodhicitta and enter into the Mahayana path. But it takes eons because there's no motivation to develop compassion because they don't have any experiences of suffering in their continuum at that point. All they have is experience of bliss. And so if they don't have their own experience of suffering, they don't have delusions in their mind, then they don't have any compulsion to see the suffering of other sentient beings. And so if they don't have that compulsion, there's no entryway into the Mahayana path, right? So even though they exist in the bliss of meditative equipoise and the nature of reality, and they exist that way for eons, they don't develop great compassion, or it's very, very difficult. They eventually do, but it takes a long time. Whereas us, it's so much easier because we see suffering every day. And by seeing that suffering, experiencing it, we develop the wish to renounce it. We develop the wish to renounce samsara and all of the marvels and perfections of samsara. When we really think about this renunciation, this is what we would think of as self-love or self-compassion. And this is the starting point to develop bodhicitta. Renouncing attachment to samsara. Not renouncing our things, not renouncing enjoyment in this world. His heart disciple, who's kind of considered the figurehead of the Kadampa lineage, he was doing circumambulation at a stupa outside the monastery. And he said to the monk, "Oh, it's so wonderful that you're doing circumambulation. Wouldn't it be better if you practiced Dharma?" So the monk was very confused. He said, "What does that mean? I thought I was practicing Dharma." He goes, "Oh, he must mean that I should be reciting texts." And so the next time Dromtonpa came by, he was reciting scripture. And Dromtonpa said, "Oh, it's so wonderful that you're reciting scripture. Wouldn't it be better if you practiced Dharma?" So now the monk's very confused. He goes, "Maybe he means I need to meditate." So he starts engaging in meditation. And the next time Dromtonpa comes by, he goes, "Oh, it's so wonderful that you're meditating. I rejoice. Wouldn't it be better if you practiced Dharma?" And so this monk, so confused, he said, "I give up. I thought I was practicing Dharma. What are you talking about?" And Dromtonpa goes, "Renounce this life. That is Dharma." So no matter what our activities, they may look like Dharma activities, but if they aren't infused with the mind of renunciation, the mind that totally wants to be free from suffering, they're not Dharma activities. And if we don't have that mind, we don't develop self-compassion. That is self-compassion. The wish for us to be free from all the suffering of samsara. To be free from all of samsara's perfections. We want to be free of those. That is self-compassion. And once we develop that, or we taste it, then we realize, wait, all sentient beings are suffering in the same way as me. Some in much more egregious for them to be free from that suffering. And then I developed the conviction that I am going to work to free develop the realization that in order to best serve them, I should become a Buddha. That will give me the most beings. And then from there, we have the mind of Bodhicitta. So that Bodhicitta, it's such a radical mind. I mentioned this last week, but Bodhicitta really is revolutionary, upside down. It takes all of our habits that we've been doing since countless lives in samsara, and it turns them on their head. We need to disrupt our lives because our lives are lived with worldly minds. And instead, we disrupt them and use bodhicitta as a revolutionary act to make us, bodhisattva revolutionaries. That's our goal. Radical bodhisattvas. We talk about radical empathy, radical compassion. You hear these terms in contemporary self-help spaces. Really, if we think about what Bodhicitta asks of us, or what even great compassion asks from us, it is quite radical. Even equanimity, trying to develop equanimity is quite radical. If we think about how we're used to living our lives. Never mind, I like to think of myself as a radical. We won't talk about that. More just about the idea that what I'm doing is so profound that it's totally changing the way I experience the world. And I can orient myself towards Buddhahood. So for me, knowing that I'm in a lineage of revolutionaries, basically, is amazing. If you think about the Buddha, think of Shakyamuni Buddha. He grew up in a life of luxury. He was a prince. He had everything he wanted. And he gave all of that up to try to find the meaning of reality. You know? He did everything that was expected of him. He gave up his wife and his son and his kingdom, you know? And he went and lived in a forest and ate nothing but a single grain of rice for a day for years. And that extreme asceticism isn't the way to Buddhahood, but it does show this commitment that like everything that is expected of me, I'm going to do the opposite. That's incredibly revolutionary. And that is our lineage, right? That's who we follow. So we all can think of ourselves as bodhisattva revolutionaries, you know, as, you know, compassionate radicals, if you will. Maybe that's not helpful for you, but for me, it encourages my practice quite a lot. Because bodhicitta is active. It isn't a passive process. Bodhicitta is always moving forward. It's not letting things happen around us. Even if it's just mental activity, not physical activity, bodhicitta is an active process. So we need to remember that. And so we need to develop bodhicitta, which is what we've been talking about. And there are two. One comes from a sangha. That's called the 7-point cause and effect practice. So that lineage went from Shakyamuni Buddha to Maitreya to Asanga. Eventually from Arya Asanga, it got passed to Selingpa, who in the other lineage is called the lineage of exchanging and equalizing self and others. And that was most explicitly taught by Shantideva. Well, we say it was implicitly taught, which is to say, if you read the way of the Bodhisattva's way of life, the Bodhicharya Vatara, it explicitly says, you know, exchange oneself and others, and so forth and so on. But it doesn't give you like step-by-step instructions on how to do it, which is why we say it's implicit. But that too, we say was taught by Shakyamuni Buddha to Manjushri. From him, it went to Nagarjuna and other Indian masters. From there, it went to from there to Shantideva. Eventually, from Shantideva, it made its way to, again, Lama Serlingpa. And Lama Serlingpa taught both these methods to Atisha, the 10th, 11th century Bengali master who traveled from India to Tibet for the second wave kind of Buddhist activity and growth in Tibet. And Atisha taught both these methods, but the method of 7-fold cause and effect he taught very publicly. And the method of equalizing and exchanging self and others he taught secretly. Because as we talk more about it and we study it more, we realize what it asks of us is more intense. And he didn't feel it was an appropriate time or that the students were appropriate students to receive that teaching. And so that teaching on the equalizing and exchanging self from others went from Atisha to Dromtonpa, and from Dromtonpa it went to Geshe Chekawa, from him to Geshe Sharawa and Geshe Lamritampa, and then from there it went to Geshe Chekawa was the last one, and Geshe Chekawa is the one who decided now is an appropriate time for this teaching to be preserved, and he started teaching it in a more public way, and that's how the teaching became kind of codified, was because of Geshe Chekawa. And then eventually, Lama Tsongkhapa combined the two methods in his Lamrim. But even when you read like the Book of Mind Training, you see that they're combining techniques from both methods. But Lama Tsongkhapa kind of created a very clear practice helps our conviction and our faith in the practice as being beneficial, even if we don't experience immediate benefits. So knowing that lineage of authenticity is really important. And it's not something we're so focused on in the West, but in Tibetan culture and in Buddhist culture in general, being able to trace the lineage of a teaching is quite important for the purposes of this firm foundation of conviction and faith. So we're working on the sevenfold cause and effect. The first steps are the causes of compassion, and then the later steps are the results of compassion. So you can either focus the idea of cause and effect on the end goal of bodhicitta, or you can have compassion serve as the pivot in the middle. Either way is a correct way to analyze the sequence. So the sequence of 7 starts with recognizing that all sentient beings are our mother, and goes on to remembering the kindness of our mothers, and then from there, the wish to repay that kindness, which we went over last week. And then we develop great love and great compassion. So great love is not considered a direct or immediate cause of great compassion, but it's usually developed first because it's easier, but it doesn't serve as a direct cause. However, you'll see when we do the the combined method, we actually have a mind of compassion first, and then love, and then those two alternate back and forth in the practice. And then from great love comes great compassion, comes the universal responsibility or the special intent. There's no good translation of this term. We say laksam in Tibetan, but lak just means like excellent, and sam means mind. And you can apply that term to different types of mind. So laksam ningje is what we're actually developing here, which is the compassion that has this special or excellent mind attached to it. So universal responsibility or special intention is often translated as, because that's what it's meaning. It's moving from the idea of compassion, which is wishing for other sentient beings to be free from suffering, to the conviction that that is my responsibility. So that is adding on to compassion. And then from there, the last step is the final result is bodhicitta. So that's the 7th one. So the first 3 steps that we went over last week, the 3 causes, recognizing that all sentient beings are our mother, remembering their kindness, wishing to repay their kindness. There's a question of why do we use the mother? And we talked about it a little last week, and it was mentioned that sometimes it's easier to develop compassion looking at other sentient beings as your child instead of your mother. And in Kushu Kyoto Rinpoche, he has a text on Tonglen, on taking and giving meditation, that I was studying last week. And in his text on Tonglen, he uses the visualization of all sentient beings as your child to develop compassion. So it's common to use the child instead of the mother, especially your only child. You view every sentient being as if they were your only child, and upon that, you can develop compassion towards them. But in the practice of developing bodhicitta, the reason the lineage and the tradition has us focus on the mother is so from the wish for others to be free from suffering to the conviction that it is my responsibility to free them from that suffering. To go from one to the other, we need some sort of compulsion or propulsion to move us forward. And so by focusing on all sentient beings as our mother, who have been infinitely kind to us over and over again, and have endured so many hardships for our benefit, because of that, we feel like we're indebted to them. And from that place of being indebted, that helps propel us forward to want to repay their kindness in a meaningful way, which is how we develop the special intention. So we don't need to focus on sentient beings as a mother. There are other ways to do it, but that feeling of being indebted to the kindness of our mothers is really important and helpful. Whereas we don't feel as indebted to our children, So we use the mother to help push us. This idea of being indebted is a heavy one. I was just giving a teaching a couple weeks ago at a center here in Bangalore called Chukar Sumling, and the students, we were studying a text by Lopon Tayang, how do you say, Ashwagosha. So the Indian Ashwagosha. And it was just a text that's in the praise of the Buddha. The title is just 150 verses because it's a praise in 150 verses. It's not a very creative title. But the last chapter in that is, every chapter is praising different qualities of the Buddha. And the last chapter is praising how the Buddha is free from debt. And then it explains in the text and in the commentary that the Buddha is free from debt because he has done an infinite amount of work for sentient beings and realized Buddhahood for their behalf. But then it goes on to say how all of us are in debt to the Buddha and to all their sentient beings. And so it's from that place of debt that we are compelled to act and to engage in the Dharma practice. And it's not a burden, right? Or we don't take it as a burden. We take it as a responsibility. And we know this in our lives. When someone loans you something, we feel a strong need to pay them back pretty quickly, right? And so in the same way, we should feel that need towards other sentient beings and their suffering. And so focusing on the mother helps us get there. But the first step, recognizing all sentient beings as our mother, isn't easy. Similarly, if we were to recognize them all as our only child, it isn't easy. Because in order to actually have that realization, we have to understand how karma works. We have to understand how past and future lives work. And we have to have conviction in all the steps of the Lamrim that get us there. So that first step is actually really difficult. And it's easy for us to be like, well, I'll have compassion for other sentient beings as if they were my mother. Like as if, right? But not because they are my mother. That's a big difference. And in the beginning, everything we do is going to be fabricated. So right now, I don't see other sentient beings as my mother. I remind myself frequently that they are my mother, my kind mother, have been over and over again. But that's not my, I don't see them that way because my mind isn't realized enough. I haven't achieved that kind of understanding or that perception. But I treat them as if they were my mother. And slowly, that will develop into conviction that they are my mother. And then it becomes something that you don't think about. When you see sentient beings, you realize immediately they are my mother. They've been my mother over and over again. They've been my father, my best friend, over and over again. They've been my child over and over again. And in the same way, they've been my enemy over and over again. And so once that conviction takes hold, then it's a really powerful practice. Until then, we slowly become familiar with it. But the strong, and we say our mothers have been infinitely kind to us, but we especially focus on how they've been kind in 4 ways, right? We say the first kindness that our mother gave us was that they gave us this body. And it's true that they're not solely responsible for that. But at the very least, we say from our mother, we received this perfect human rebirth. And so that alone is an incredible kindness. But then not only did they give us a perfect human rebirth and this body with which we can practice the Dharma, but they nurtured us and took care of us and prevented us from experiencing harm, both while we were in the womb and then after we were born. As an infant or as a young child, we couldn't take care of ourselves. We'd die within a day if we didn't have someone to take care of us. And so over and over again, our mothers fed us and they took care of us, prevented us from experiencing harm. But not only that, but our mothers taught us how to live in the world, which is worldly knowledge, right? It's not spiritual knowledge, but we still need it. We wouldn't be where we are today if we didn't understand how to live in the world, how to take care of ourselves, how to bathe, how to dress, how to feed ourselves, how to do all the things that are necessary for a productive life from the worldly point of view. We don't want to become entrenched in these worldly goals and from worldly activities as being the main goals, but we do need to understand them. Otherwise, right, we couldn't take care of ourselves. And so our mother taught us that. So that's the third kindness we often remember. And then the last one is our mother endured such difficulties and hardships for our sake. And not only that, our mother committed negative actions to benefit us. Our mothers stole food to feed us. Our mothers harmed others to protect us. Maybe not our mother of this life, but it definitely happened over and over again in the past. So not only did our mother endure hardships to benefit us, but they accumulated negative karma to benefit us as well. So these are the 4 general ways we talk about remembering the kindness of our mother. But we can think of specific instances in our own lives as well, both in this life and generally. And whatever kindnesses we think of all help us to the next step, which is they've been kind in so many ways, our dear mothers, that I developed a wish that I want to repay their kindness. And if I want to repay my mother's kindness, we can do it in material ways, obviously. And that is helpful, especially depending on the circumstances. But ultimately, the best way to repay their kindness is with a spiritual repayment, a repayment that lasts more than just this life. And so that is what we need to focus on. I was at a teaching once, I think at Gyume Monastery, and His Holiness Dalai Lama was giving a teaching. And in the introduction, he spoke about how it was quite shameful that we all say we're practicing the Mahayana, Buddha, so I'm going to go meditate, I'm going to study. He's like, but I don't help the many, many beggars that live right outside the monastery grounds, and he shelters and do all this work to help others, and we do almost nothing. He's like, so many Buddhists do nothing because they say, oh, no, I'm only going to help them in the future when I'm a Buddha. And that's ignoring the nature of reality. But if you have means and methods and techniques and privilege now in this life, you should use it to help others. And worldly benefit isn't the end goal, right? But if you can provide worldly benefit, why would you not provide worldly benefit? Even if the goal is for all beings to become Buddhas and to be free from all suffering, if you can help them here and now, you should be doing that as well. And so he kind of shamed all the monks who to say, oh, I'm going to become Buddha, I'll help them later. He's like, no, that's just laziness, That's just a self-cherishing mind. That's all that is. So that's none of what you practice becomes bodhicitta, because it's all infused with the self-cherishing mind. So Dalai Lama, kind of put us in our place a little bit. But it's something we need to remember that, yes, the goal is to free all sentient beings from suffering. So, and the only way to do that is by providing spiritual gifts, however that may be, working on our own mind, giving the example of living a life full of Dharma, teaching Dharma, whatever different techniques we may have. But if we have resources and privileges and means to offer worldly help as well, we should be doing that. But once we develop that wish, then from that wish, the next thing we develop is great love. So that's the next step, the 4th step out of the 7. So what is love, we say, in the Buddhist context? Love is the wish for other sentient beings to have happiness and all the causes of happiness. That's what we say love is. And great love is love that has all sentient beings, and it is uncontrived or effortless. So those are 2 of the qualities of being great love, is that not only is it the wish for sentient beings to have happiness, but for all sentient beings to have happiness, and it doesn't take any effort on our part. Our minds are always infused with that great love when it actually develops. So love, as we understand it, and it's often translated as loving kindness, I think, because people don't want to confuse it with love or experience of that we have aren't actually love. We give it the name love, right? But they're often, this idea, maybe it has an idea of love, but it's mixed with attachment. It's mixed with delusion. It's mixed with clinging and desire. And because of that, we give it this idea, this name love, but it's not real love. Is there a hand up? Someone, I don't know, my screen just flashed at me. Okay, sorry. So I usually just translate love as, if we think about real love, we want others to be happy and have all the causes of happiness, then our goal isn't to change others, right? Our goal isn't to manipulate others. So that love has no expectations. It has no attachments. And because of that, there's also no insecurity. Think of, especially when you're in a new relationship. I remember once getting a teaching when I was in grad school. There's a Lama who lived nearby who gave a teaching one day. And my friend said, and he gave a teaching on, he brought up love and all these things. And a friend of mine, who's also a Buddhist, said, that guy's been a monk since he was 6 years old. How does he have any idea what it's like to be in a relationship? So I'll say that from my side, yes, I've been a monk for decades now. But we think of when we're in a new relationship, especially, and we start developing what we securities come. Do they feel the same way about me? Do they feel that way about others, right? But what we call love actually breeds insecurity. It doesn't bring them happiness. It brings us samsaric happiness, but not real happiness. It breeds insecurity. It breeds doubt. So we can focus just on people in our immediate circle, our family or our loved ones, and try to see what would it be like if we loved them without any attachment, without any expectations, with full confidence and no insecurity, nothing but the pure wish for them to be happy and to have all the causes of happiness. How would that transform our relationship with them? So we start there because we already have some feeling of love for them. And we develop that love, we strip away the attachment, we strip away the clinging, and we try to take that love we have and make it into a pure love, actual love that meets that definition, isn't tainted by one of the 8 worldly minds. And once we experience that towards someone we already care for, then we expand it out to others. And by having already developed equanimity, or working to develop equanimity, that sees all sentient beings as equal, because of that, it's easier to move that love to others. We start with equanimity because it gives us a foundation, right? It makes all of our practices after it secure. So even though it's called the 7-point cause and effect, we say mind method. And equanimity is that mind that sees that all sentient beings are the same and wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. And so because of that, all sentient beings are equal in deserving my love and my compassion. All sentient beings are equal in deserving to be free from suffering. And all sentient beings are equal in having the seed of Buddhahood in their continuum, right? All sentient beings are equal in their capacity to become Buddhas. And all sentient beings will eventually become Buddhas, we say. So we start with that equanimity that doesn't hold one above another. If that's hard to develop, they actually say there's 9 reasons and points that we can use to help us develop equanimity. There are 6 relative points and 3 ultimate points. And the 6 relative points are 3 that are relative to oneself, 3 relative to the other, and then 3 that are ultimate. So is that we depend on all sentient beings for our happiness. All of the happiness in this life, any nice thing you have in this life, it was made by someone else, right? Which you made it. Were made by someone else, transported to your place. All these things, in a worldly sense, rely on others. And then in a spiritual sense, our happiness comes from um, from serving others. So all of our happiness in this life, both worldly happiness and spiritual happiness, depend on other sentient beings. Without other sentient beings, it would be impossible. And in the same way, the second point that is relative to oneself is that our liberation and our Buddhahood depend on other sentient beings. If we couldn't develop altruistic minds, it'd be really hard to practice patience if there weren't other sentient beings, and so forth. So we depend on sentient beings not only for our happiness in this life and in future lives, but in order to achieve liberation and enlightenment. We depend on sentient beings. And not only that, but we think of sentient beings as being equal to the Buddhas in the help that they give us, which can seem difficult to wrap your mind around. But it's one of the 3 points we talk about. Not only are all sentient beings all of our happiness depends on sentient beings. The help they give us is the same as the Buddha's help. So those are the 3 reasons to develop equanimity that are relative to oneself. The 3 reasons that all sentient beings are equal in wanting happiness and not wanting to suffer. There's no difference, right? And not only are all sentient beings the exact same and wanting happiness of others. That's number 2. You know, no sentient being can exist on their own. All sentient beings need the help of others. And lastly, all sentient beings are equal in that they're tormented by the delusions, that they are caught by the waves of karma and delusion, and they're tormented by all these deluded minds relative to others, that we develop equanimity by thinking these 3 points. And then the 3 ultimate points, I just got a message saying I'm freezing. Is my video freezing or my audio?
It's both. Yeah, it's both. So
It's both.
it says like it's just freezing. So if you're listening hard, you can get the one thing that you say, and then 10 seconds later, we hear the second thing that you're saying. So I don't think we're missing anything, but it is sometimes hard to follow.
I can try to switch to a different internet connection. I don't know if that'll help. So why don't we stick with this, and then if it gets bad, then I'll disconnect and try to reconnect with a different one. So if it gets worse, maybe raise another hand or let me know or interrupt me again, and we'll switch if we need to. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry about that, folks. Glad that the rainy season has come though. The farmers are getting quite worried. It's been very dry here, so it's nice that it's raining, but it rains 24 hours a day, so it hasn't stopped raining in over a week, and that makes all everything a little bit underlined. Middle ground, you know?
I think they got, I'm sorry for interrupting you, Venerable, but I think they got just really bad because just like as you said it and you started teaching, we didn't hear what you were saying.
Okay, folks. Am I here?
So far, so good.
Okay, I switched to a different internet connection. And you're all frozen for me, but if you can hear me, then we can keep it going and try to overcome these obstacles together. Okay.
Absolutely.
There is a great joy that the pandemic taught us the ability to do so much virtual teaching. And then Thupten Nombo Ling has been very progressive in getting teachers from all over the world to offer courses. But then sometimes you're stuck with internet connections from India as being your connection. And so, there's give and take in all these things. So we're talking about in order to develop great love, we first have to have the three causes, which are recognizing all sentient beings as our mother, remembering their kindness and wishing to repair our kindness. And in our practice of developing those, we start first with equanimity, because that gives us a solid and secure foundation. And so we're talking about when you develop equanimity, there are often 9 points that advise us to reflect on why all sentient beings are the same, and why there's no distinction between friend, enemy, and stranger. And those 9 points are divided into 6 points that are relative and 3 points that are ultimate. And the 6 that are relative are 3 that are relative to others, 3 that are relative to oneself, 3 that are relative to others, and then they're the 3 ultimate. So my screen just keeps flashing. Your internet connection is unstable. There's nothing I can do about that. So I'm not sure what to say. Okay. But it's not. It has nothing to do with your video. It doesn't have to do with the internet speed. It just has to do with the internet not wanting to stay connected. Okay. Let's try to get through this material one more time. It's okay. Obstacles. Better to have them come here than, in our practice. So developing equanimity. 9 points to meditate on why all sentient beings are the same. And then there's no distinction between friend, enemy, and stranger. 6 that are relative, 3 that are ultimate. 6 that are relative, 3 that are relative to oneself, 3 that are relative to others, and then 3 that are ultimate. The 3 that are relative to oneself, first, that all of our happiness depends on sentient beings. And then not only that, our liberation, our enlightenment depends on sentient beings. And thirdly, sentient beings are equal to the Buddhas in how kind they are to us, whether they intend to be or not, whether it's explicit or not. So those are the 3 causes why we should recognize that all sentient beings are the same and develop equanimity that are relative to oneself. Now, the 3 causes that are relative to others are firstly that all sentient beings are the exact same in wanting happiness and not wanting to suffer. And then not only that, all sentient beings are the exact same in needing help from others. And all sentient beings are the exact same in the fact that they are tormented by the deluded minds. So those are the 3 causes for recognizing sentient beings as being the same that are relative to others. And then lastly, there are the 3 ultimate reasons. And these are all related to the ultimate mind, so the mind that realizes the nature of reality, that realizes emptiness. And the first one is that we realize that the labels that we give to others of friend, enemy, and stranger, those are all projected by deluded conceptual minds. That's all they are. They have no basis in reality. They're projections from our conceptual mind. And then that's the first one. And not only that, the idea or label or the status of friend, enemy, stranger appears to us as if it were permanent, but they're not permanent. And even a little bit of reflection can help us see that they're not permanent. And the fact that in this life alone, we've had people that have been our friends and then have become our enemies, or vice versa, right? But the labels or ideas or the status of friend, enemy, stranger, we think of as permanent, and they're not permanent. So not only are they mere mistaken projections from our conceptual deluded minds, but they appear to us as if they were permanent, actual, truly established modes of being, and they're not. And then lastly, the idea of me and others, of self and others, itself depends on interdependence. So the only reason we think others exist is because I exist, right? We create this, we need both. So in the same way, you can't have near if you don't have far, You can't have here if you don't have there, right? Those ideas are relative to one another. So our relationship with other sentient beings is one of interdependence, that the existence of someone separate from me depends on the existence of me. And my existence is dependent upon there being others that are distinct from me in this way, that conceptual mind. And so because that interdependent relationship, that is the last ultimate reason why we should view others equal to ourselves in desiring happiness and in deserving of Buddhahood, right? So not only are the labels we give them conceptual projections that come from deluded minds, and not only do we perceive those labels as permanent, those ideas or status or identity as permanent, when in fact they're not permanent. Not only those two reasons, but lastly, we are in an interdependent relationship with all other sentient beings. And so because of that interdependence, we realize that all sentient beings are the same as us. There's no distinction from us. So based on those 9, reflecting on those 9 reasons, we develop equanimity, and others as well, but those are the 9 that are given in the scriptures or in the texts. And so we develop equanimity. That serves as the basis. And that eventually brings us to great love, which we were talking about. And great love that focuses on all sentient beings. And I think what's an important thing to remember is that the more objects there are of our love or our compassion, it doesn't diminish the power of that love, right? We may have the thought, I can't love all other sentient beings the same way I love my family members, because then that makes my family members less important. But that's not true, right? It's not a value judgment of your people you already love and care for. It's realizing that everyone deserves the same treatment. And the truth is, we have the capacity of infinite love and infinite compassion. All of us do. So because of that, because we have that capacity, we're not going to run out of love or compassion. And loving more sentient beings doesn't diminish the love we have for other sentient beings. That's not how it works. So this can be an obstacle that we are hesitant or reticent to really develop love and compassion for others, because we say, I don't want to lose any of the love I have for my family, for my friends, for my partner, like this. And we think that by loving others, we somehow diminish the love we have for those that we already care for. So this is nothing but self-cherishing, really. It's self-cherishing mind that is clinging to the happiness we receive from our friends and family and prioritizing that. But it takes the guise of this concern, because self-cherishing is very sneaky. It pretends that it's actually concerned. But if we have confidence that our love is infinite, that our ability to care for other beings is infinite, then that concern melts away. And if we realize that by loving other beings, the same realizes that we have an infinite capacity to love. And that love, as we try to practice it, it transforms the way we view others. When every time you see another person or another being, you have the mind that says, may they have all happiness and the causes of happiness. That transforms how you see them. You see them as an object who is deserving of only good things, even when they're engaging in harmful actions. And when we don't have love, or we have love that's mixed with delusion, whether it be attachment or something else, that is where kind of paranoia and disdain and frustration and all these other strong negative minds start to grow in that absence of love. Because you can't actually have a mind of love that's manifest in your continuum simultaneously with a mind of anger, for instance. Because they're rigmitumba, they're incompatible, So the more we develop minds of love, the less space we give for our negative minds to develop. And so when we remove these fake limitations this idea that I have a limited amount of love that I can give. When we remove that and we realize our potential, which is infinite, then we engage with other sentient beings with nothing but the whole heart wishing for them to be happy. It totally, totally transforms our way of engaging in the world. When you see others, everyone that you meet, as deserving not just love in a general sense, but your love, your desire for them to be happy, and your desire for them to have all the causes of happiness, it brings them a lot closer to you, right? That love brings us closer to sentient beings. And in the same way, great compassion does the same thing. So great compassion is the next of the 7 steps. So it's the 5th one. And really, great compassion is considered the root of Bodhicitta and the root of Buddhahood in this way. So the difference between great love and great compassion: love is the wish for others to have happiness and the causes of happiness. Compassion is the wish for others to be free from suffering and all the causes of suffering. So they're like 2 sides of the same coin. And again, great compassion is compassion that has all sentient beings as its object, not just individual sentient beings. And it is effortless, right? It is not contrived in that way. So we start with baby compassion, and slowly, 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 it becomes great compassion. So even though compassion and love are like 2 sides of the same coin, compassion is considered the root of Buddhahood more so than love, because similar to when we were saying why we meditate on the mother, compassion, when we recognize others' suffering, it gives us more propulsion to want to free others from that suffering, more than love does. So in that way, it pushes us forward. It's more active. Or it has both love and compassion are equally active, but for those of us that are still practicing on the path, that are trying to develop bodhicitta, compassion gives us a more active experience. One of my favorite images of compassion is green Tara, or Tara. You know, Tara is considered the Buddha of compassion, or one of the Buddhas of compassion. But when you look at her in her iconography, she always has one foot extended. So she's not sitting with her feet both folded together, sentient beings. That when she sees a sentient being who is suffering, she wants to be able to help them immediately. And the amount of time it would take to uncross her legs is too long to wait. So she always has one leg extended. So for me, Tara, or Droma, is compassion in action, which is what we need to manifest in our lives. Not just this willy-nilly idea that others should be free from suffering, but we need to be acting it out in our lives. And so Tara is the best example of that, I think. Because just looking at her body, her leg is always extended. She's ready to go. The amount of time it takes to uncross her legs is too long to wait when others are suffering. In this commentary by Say Chilbu Gyalten I was talking about earlier, he's talking about thinking of your mother's love and developing compassion based on the kindness of your mother. And he says, really, when you meditate in this way, it should be so deep that your eyes are filled with tears that stream down your face when you think of the suffering of other sentient beings. It's not just words, right? When you think of how others suffer, it needs to really penetrate your mind, your heart. And so you should be so overwhelmed by other suffering that you shouldn't be able to bear it. And that is what it means to really recognize how others suffer and to have the wish to repay their kindness by eliminating their suffering. You know, so the idea of uncrossing my legs takes too long. It gets me too far away from sentient beings, I think, is a really, really profound image. For me, when I think of trying to help others, I go, well, I'll think about it. Maybe, let's see. You know, there's a lot of dilly-dally. I'm not, you know, it's a lot of work still. I do my best. We all do. But I just think of the difference between myself and what the goal is, and I realize there's so much more work to do, you know? So not only do we find other suffering unbearable, but we have the wish for them to be entirely free from that suffering. So we say compassion is different than pity, and different than empathy. And again, in many like conventional language, those might all be used interchangeably. But here, we think of pity especially having some sort of condescension, right, involved with it. Oh, poor them, those people who are separate from me, who are different from me. So we don't, there's no condescension involved. There's no looking down when you have actual compassion, right? It's holding others up, not looking down on them. So in that way, it's different from pity. And it's different from empathy insofar as that compassion is active. Empathy, experiencing the sufferings of the world, the empathic experience, that doesn't always mean an active drive to help them be free from suffering. So empathy, so compassion is active, whereas we think of empathy as more inert. So empathy is a good first step to developing compassion in this way. When we think of the suffering other beings experience, and we can just see examples in our life of the great physical suffering, but really the emotional and mental suffering far outweighs the physical suffering. And so in order to really help eliminate their mental suffering, that is what we need to become well-versed in Bodhicitta, but also in the nature of reality. That's why we have to become Buddhas, so we can relieve their mental suffering. Sometimes we may not notice physical suffering, but just because we don't see any physical distress doesn't mean there isn't great emotional or mental distress, right? Kyabje Lama Rinpoche would say, we look at a lot of the pets we have, dogs and cats, who look like they live the lives of luxury because they live in what is like a palace to them. They get everything they want, all the toys and food and treats that they want. If they want to be pet or rubbed or get attention, they get it. We clean up, their waste. We do everything for them. Their lives are like little spoiled brats. So they must be so happy, right? But then he says, if you could enter into the mind of a dog for just 1 second, just a moment, you would never sleep again because you'd be so committed to practicing Dharma, because you would never want to experience that mental suffering that they experience as animals. So even able to tap into that for just a moment would terrify you so greatly that you would never do anything besides practice Dharma. That's how intense their mental suffering can be in the animal realm. And that is much lighter than in other realms, right? So we see the physical suffering, and for many of us, that is an easy entryway into thinking of other suffering because it's what we're used to. But when we think of the different types of suffering, the suffering of suffering, the suffering of change, and the suffering of all compounded phenomena, then we realize that it's that most subtle suffering that we need to eliminate. And it's the mental suffering that comes from the suffering of change that we need to eliminate. And so when we wish for others to be free from suffering, yes, we don't want them to be in physical pain or physical distress. That is there, and that is critical. But on top of that, we don't want them to have gross emotional distress or subtle emotional distress. And then on top of that, we don't want them to even have the capacity to suffer again. So we want them to be free from the sufferings that come from the inside. Or rather, there's no suffering from the outside, but the experiences, external conditions that cause physical and external suffering versus the emotional and mental suffering as well. And by developing that compassion, it brings us closer to other sentient beings. The stronger our love and compassion is, we see less distinction between ourselves and others, which is, again, we look at our self-cherishing mind. When we have developed some kind of taste of equanimity, realizing all beings are equal, and then from that, we develop a wish to repay them, and we develop this mind of really great compassion, or even baby compassion, we stop the lines between self and other becomes blurry. And as those blur, it eliminates the possibility of self-cherishing, right? And that's why compassion and bodhicitta are such profound antidotes to self-cherishing, because you stop focusing on yourself and you dedicate yourself to others instead. So how can you have a mind working for your own benefit? Self-cherishing, self-grasping, wanting my own happiness, when all of your active processes are focused on others, you know? Like taking all the wind out of the sail of the self-cherishing mind. And by doing that, it brings us closer to other sentient beings. And, you know, the amazing thing about these practices is that they build on each other. So once you start developing even a baby compassion, has its own cause, right? And it causes itself to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So we shouldn't be sad that like all I can do is generate the smallest amount of compassion. And right now, when I see, you know, someone who's sick or hurt or an animal that like, you know, is in pain, I can develop compassion. But beyond that, it's difficult. Okay, that's where we start. We rejoice in that compassion we're able to develop. And by rejoicing in that compassion and focusing on that, then it becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. So no matter where we are in the path, we rejoice that we're pointed towards Buddhahood. Okay? And by rejoicing and practicing as best we can, we make incremental progress. We have the relaxed mind that says, I'm not going to become a Buddha tomorrow, and that's okay. I'm doing the best I can. And I recognize that there are so many topics to cover. There's so many interlocking pieces that wisdom helps me develop bodhicitta and compassion, but compassion and bodhicitta help me develop wisdom. And my stabilizing meditation gives me the ground to do analytical meditation. But the more analytical meditation I have, the easier it is for me to develop confidence in the ability of my stabilizing meditation. They all work together. So whatever little pieces we have, we rejoice in those pieces. And that builds them. That helps them get stronger. The compassion is not ignoring harmful behavior, which I think is important. And especially, we live in the world, right? So we have to engage with others in a meaningful way. And so just for wishing for others to be free from suffering doesn't mean we should ignore when others are being harmful to themselves or to others. But we need to use wisdom to mediate how we engage in the real world and in examples like that. But again, compassion isn't passive. It isn't just saying, oh, I wish that it was better. It is taking an active stance to eliminate suffering of others, and that can involve engaging others who are engaging in harmful behavior, trying to have them turn away from the harmful behavior, right? I think of, you know, the protests that happen, especially in America, in the last couple of years, due to there are various protests, but mostly due to the violence from systems and structures of power that are imposed on marginalized people, especially people of color, and these huge protests that happen, and the outrage that fuels them. And if we can separate outrage from anger and recognize that outrage is actually a manifestation of compassion, wanting others to be free from suffering, that doesn't have to have anger fueling it, then that outrage, that kind of need to engage in action to stop others from suffering and to prevent the systemic oppression of others, that causes us to confront other beings who are causing harm, right? So compassion isn't saying just sit back and let it happen. It's saying do what you have to do, but you do it with a mind that is only focused on the compassion, not focused on harming others. So if others are engaging in harmful action, you don't have a judgment for them. You don't have anger or hatred towards them. You have the wish for them to stop engaging in harm. Because by engaging in harming others, they're actually causing greater harm to themselves. And they are harming themselves far more than they harm others. If we think of the worst enemy in this life, the worst thing they can do to us is kill us, take away our life. But that only is harming us for one life, this life. But the negative karma they create by engaging in that action, they experience the results of that negative karma for eons, over and over and over again. So the harm they cause themselves is far greater than the harm they can cause us. So compassion compels us to act when others are engaging in harmful behavior. But we use wisdom to figure out what is the most beneficial way we can engage in a situation. I think a lot of people that have some idea of the Buddhist teachings feel they get this misunderstanding that Buddhism is very passive and just letting things happen around you while you're focusing on your own mind. But I think that Buddhism has to be active. And if we're just only ignoring the world around us, saying eventually I'll get there, then that is nothing but self-cherishing. Now, not everyone has the same capacity to engage in external action, right? So we have to analyze, what are our means? What are our resources? What can we do without harming ourselves? But then we become compelled to take that action, because that's how we live compassion in our lives. And compassion on its own has so many benefits. It purifies our negative karma. But not only that, it prevents us from creating negative karma in the future. And it, like I said, it's radical. It totally changes the dynamics of how we engage in all of our social interactions. And so compassion is something we need in the beginning and the middle and the end. We often say things like that for compassion, virtue, and so forth. But we say even when we're practicing the path, we need compassion in the beginning, because that is what helps from great compassion as its substantial cause. So we need compassion in the beginning, in the same way we need to plant seeds. But then we need compassion in the middle, because that compassion is what propels us to continue acting. So in the same way we water or fertilize the seeds we plant, compassion in the middle is what causes our bodhicitta to grow and become stronger. And then we need compassion at the end, in the same way that we then reap the fruit that we've grown. That compassion compels us to teach others and to help others. So even the Buddha, they say, compassion is one of the reasons that the Buddha teaches the Dharma, right? So a bodhisattva needs compassion in the beginning, middle, and end, and so do we. So we need it as the instigator to our practice. We need it as the way to sustain our practice, and we need it at the end as the way to compel and increase our practice. Okay, we've gone longer than I wanted to, but I want to get through a few more points, because I want to get through the 7 steps today. So we'll do our meditation will just be briefer. So after great love and great compassion, the next thing is called the superior intention, as I mentioned, or the universal responsibility. And the difference is that compassion is the wish for others to be free from suffering and all the causes of suffering. And then you add on to that, that is my responsibility. I will do that. That is what we call the universal responsibility. So it's taking compassion and it's turning up the knob to 11. Okay. And it's saying, not just do they deserve to be free from suffering, but it's my job to free all sentient beings from suffering. And so this is directly related to realizing we have a debt to all sentient beings. That other sentient beings are kind to us in infinite ways, that all of our happiness, including liberation and enlightenment, depend on sentient beings. And because of that, we owe them a debt. And all sentient beings are our dear mother, who have been kind to us in so many ways and endured so many hardships for our sake, that we owe them a debt. And so the way we repay that debt is by actively working to eliminate their suffering and developing the intention to do this and the mind that says, I will eliminate the suffering of others. I take that burden upon myself. That is the special intention. That is kind of the halfway point between compassion and actual bodhicitta, is this like middle step, right? So it's not the same as bodhicitta, which is a mind that is actively working towards Buddhahood and is doing it in an uncontrived way and effortlessly. But it's the effortful intention. I will do this, right? You know, this brings up one of these things that I termed the bodhisattva paradox. I don't know, I haven't heard that term before, but for me it fits. When we talk about becoming Buddhas and the work we do, we say that no other sentient being can eliminate our suffering besides ourselves. I am solely responsible for my own suffering. No one else can get rid of it for me. And yet we also say, yet it's my responsibility to eliminate the suffering of all sentient beings. And those two sentiments seem paradoxical, right? It's a paradox because it creates tension, and that tension gives me a place to situate myself, and it gives me something to think about and to reflect on. I know that in a most minute sense, right? I know that. And I know that I only have responsibility. No one else has the responsibility to save me from my deluded mind except for me. Yet, when I engage in practice in such a way that I take upon the burden upon myself of eliminating the suffering of all sentient beings, that practice becomes so much more powerful. And if I didn't realize that kind of paradoxical nature, that expectation, then it might just become second nature. I wouldn't think about it so much. No one can eliminate my suffering but me, yet I am responsible to eliminate the suffering of all sentient beings. I take that burden upon myself. I take the burden of becoming a Buddha to eliminate the suffering of all sentient beings. And then we say, well, that's not a burden. That's a joy. That's infinite happiness. Right? I take upon myself the quest to achieve never-ending happiness and bliss of Buddhahood so I can become a cause of happiness for all sentient beings. So I can eliminate the suffering of all sentient beings. Because that responsibility isn't a burden. That responsibility is what lifts us up. It's a buoyancy. That responsibility to help others is a motivating factor that keeps us filled with joy all the time. When we consider it a burden, when we consider it work, then we're not going to make progress. It's the same way with our vows, you know? So most of you probably have lay vows. So the 5 vows of a lay person, you know, not to kill human beings, not to kill, not to steal, not to lie, not to engage in sexual misconduct, and not to consume intoxicants. You also probably have, or you may have, the bodhisattva vows and commitments, which are more numerous. Someone like me, I have the fully ordained monk's vows, which are 253 in number compared to the 5 individual liberation vows a layperson has. And it's easy to think about those vows and those commitments as being shackles, as preventing me from doing the things I want to do, right? Even the same way when you only have 5, you know, it's easy to think of them as getting in the way of your happiness. But when you have that mindset, life becomes so difficult. When you realize that all of these vows we take and the commitments, what they're really doing is keeping us on the path of virtue. And they're showing us the way to live a perfectly virtuous life that's dedicated to serving others and is totally eliminating the possibility of engaging in non-virtuous minds or activities. How incredible those vows become, right? They're not burdens. They don't weigh us down. What they're doing is lifting us up. They're showing us the way to liberation. And so when you think of the responsibility to help others as being a burden that you carry, you're only going to be held down. When you think of the responsibility to liberate others from suffering as being like the wind that lifts you up and pushes you forward, then it propels you on the path to Buddhahood, right? So we can't think of these things as burdens. We think of the responsibility as a joy, as a gift, as something we're so precious, and we're so fortunate to have found it. So the superior intention that develops from great compassion is not only do we recognize that all sentient beings are suffering, and we develop the wish for them to be free from suffering, the causes of suffering, but then we say it is my responsibility that I undertake with great joy in my heart to eliminate all of their suffering. So those are the 6 steps, and we practice them, we meditate on them, and the result is bodhicitta, when we do it long enough and deep enough. And so we know that we're not going to get there tomorrow, but we might have some tastes of bodhicitta, right? Just the flavor of bodhicitta in our everyday life. And so the more we practice these, not just on the meditation cushion, but in our everyday life, the stronger and stronger and stronger each one will become. And so when we meditate, we can meditate on all 6 in sequence, or we can just focus on one of them and then slowly put them all together. We see what's best for our mind and for our practice. But then whatever we do, the goal of meditation, right, is to become familiar with these ideas. To meditate, gom, in Tibetan, it means to become familiar with something, to habituate yourself with something. So by meditating, we're becoming familiar with our mind. By meditating on compassion, we're making compassion indivisible from our mind. By meditating on the recognition that all sentient beings are our dear mother, and have been numerous times, we're making that habitual, indistinguishable from our mind. That's what it means to meditate on something. Then in our everyday life, we don't have to think about these things. They come naturally. That's our goal, is to make the motivation to help others be a natural occurrence. Who deserve to have their kindness repaid. We feel indebted to them, so we have great love and compassion for them and the responsibility to free them from suffering. The more we practice that in a baby way, and the more mental activity we spend now having fabricated versions of that, the easier and easier and easier it becomes. So that's where we need to practice, because even small acts can have incredibly large results, right? Both in the immediate sense and in the karmic sense. We know one of the laws of karma is that karma multiplies, both negative and positive karma, right? So even a small virtuous act, the karma from that can multiply. And it will multiply as long as we don't engage in any negative minds that cause it to cease to be. But even in an immediate sense, in a worldly sense, how many times in your life have you been having a really hard day and someone just does a small act of kindness toward you and it makes everything feel better, right? You might have been having really, really gross, coarse suffering and someone brings you a cup of coffee out of the blue or a bouquet of flowers, something small and trivial that has no real meaning. But they did it as an act of kindness because they knew you were unhappy or suffering. And that small act of kindness totally changes your day from being one that's filled with suffering and like, you know, whatever kind of unhappiness you have. Small acts of kindness are revolutionary. And that's in a worldly sense. So if they're revolutionary in a worldly sense, of course, they're revolutionary in a spiritual sense. So we start with whatever small concern for others we have, and we nurture that. Even if it's just a baby concern, we nurture it, we let it grow bigger, bigger, bigger. And that's what this practice is for. Because Bodhicitta is a kind, open heart. It is a practice that it is the main practice of all the Buddhas that came before us. And so by practicing Bodhicitta and trying to develop it, we're putting ourselves in direct lineage of all the Buddhas that came before us, all of our teachers that have taught us even a single word of Dharma. That Bodhicitta creates space. It allows us to have feeling. Compassion and bodhicitta don't ignore reality. They don't isolate from reality, but they jump headfirst into reality. And they work with whatever means are available to prevent the suffering of others. So that's what we need to do. So with that, let's take a really quick break, just so people can stretch their legs, use the bathroom if we have to. And we'll come back in, let's say, 5 minutes. We'll do a quick meditation because I've taken so much time. Because let's do a 5-minute break starting now. Welcome back, everyone. So this meditation will be very brief. I'd like to blame it on the internet connection, but truthfully, it's just because I'm not good at time management. So we'll blame it on the rain, but we'll know that the truth is my own self-cherishing mind that isn't able to watch a clock correctly. So take a comfortable position, however that may be. Whether you're sitting in a chair, if you're sitting in a chair, then have your feet flat, both shoulder width apart. If you're sitting with your feet crossed, whatever way is comfortable for you. The goal is to have a nice, secure, stable foundation. Let your spine be nice and straight. Your head sitting on top of your spine naturally, following the curve of your spine, not tucked in too deep or lifted up too straight. Your hands resting gently on your thighs or in the meditation mudra at your navel. Your jaw is nice and loose, not clenched, hanging open slightly, your lips slightly apart. Your tongue resting on the roof of your mouth behind your hard palate. Your eyes half open, following the end of your nose to the space in front of you, not focused. And we'll take a moment just to focus on our breathing, to center ourselves in the space, to calm the distractions from our mind. So just notice your breathing as you breathe in And breathe out, not forcing your breath, but letting it fall into its own natural rhythm. And when distracting thoughts arise, recognize them and then let them go and allow your awareness to return to your breath. So today we're going to meditate on developing compassion. And to do that, first we need to have compassion for ourselves, the wish for ourselves to be free from suffering and the causes of all suffering. And so to help us with this and with them maintaining the concept of infinite compassion, first we visualize in the space in front of us one of our teachers. It can be a Lama in this life. It could be His Holiness Dalai Lama. It could be Shakyamuni Buddha. But visualize in the space in front of you one of your teachers. And at your teacher's heart center is a glowing ball of white light, which is their wish for you to be free from suffering. At their heart center radiates out, and you're bathed in the loving, compassionate light of your guru. So you actually experience the wish for their wish for you to be free from suffering and to be free from all the causes of suffering. So allow yourself a moment to experience that wish that your guru has for you, the compassion your guru is sending towards you in the form. Once you have a taste of that, allow your visualization of the guru to move so your guru is just above your head, facing the same direction as you. But their compassion, that brilliant white light from their body, is still pouring into you, filling you up, and it's activating the compassion you have in your own mind. Now visualize in the space in front 3 beings from your life. 1 who you might classify as a friend, someone towards you to whom you have some attachment. 1 you might classify as an enemy, someone towards whom you have some anger or resentment, or someone who has harmed you in some way. And 1 who you might classify as a stranger, who you have neither attachment nor anger towards, but instead that relationship is one of ignorance. Actually visualize these 3 in front of you. And now realize that the labels, friend, enemy, stranger, are mere projections of your mind. But all 3 of these beings are equal and deserving happiness and to be free from suffering. Not only are they the same in that way, but they're the same in deserving your wish for happiness and freedom from suffering. And the labels you give them are mere projections. And so therefore, we should develop the same level of compassion toward all of them, and indeed all sentient beings. Because all sentient beings are suffering from deluded minds. All sentient beings are held back by the delusions. And those delusions cause them to act in all different ways. But there's no distinction. And so, if we were doing a longer meditation, we would take a moment to think of the different sufferings these beings experience. We could think of the sufferings they've experienced when they were hell beings, whether in the hot hells or the cold hells. We bring to mind the sufferings they experienced as hungry ghosts. incredible hunger and thirst that never ends, the sufferings they experience as animals, with lives pervaded by fear and ignorance, the sufferings they've experienced when they were born in God realms, mental sufferings beyond imagine. But for the moment, we'll think of the sufferings they've experienced just as human beings. The suffering, the sickness they've experienced, the suffering of age, the suffering of unhappiness, emotional distress, the sufferings that are all brought about by the self-cherishing mind. And so, in seeing these three beings in front of us, we visualize them as embodying all sentient beings, and we strongly develop the wish for them to be free from every single one of their sufferings. And that compassionate wish glows like a brilliant white light in our heart center, fueled by our Guru's compassion. And it radiates out of our heart as brilliant white light. So visualize this brilliant white light being emitted from your heart center, bathing the three beings you visualized in front. And as that light is absorbed into their pores, it removes all their suffering and all the causes of suffering. This brilliant compassion is never ceasing. And if any moment you feel like your compassion is waning, remember the experience of your Guru, this friend in front of me, never again experience any suffering or the causes of suffering. May this enemy in front of me never again experience any suffering or the causes of suffering. May this stranger in front of me never again experience any suffering or the causes of suffering. And as the brilliant white light from your heart fills their bodies, all their suffering is dissolved away. And now you can allow the visualization in the front to fade, but still visualize your compassionate heart, brilliantly glowing white. The Guru above your head dissolves into the ball of white light at their heart, the pure compassion, and that enters through your crown of your head and takes rest at your heart. So your own infinite capacity for compassion is joined by your Guru's infinite compassion, which are of the same flavor, the same nature. And this infinite compassion, this brilliant white light at your heart, it never diminishes. So even as you arise from the meditation state, you'll maintain this mind recognizing the brilliant white ball of compassion at your heart center that radiates out of all your pores, causing you to glow. And so, holding on to this meditation, this visualization, we can allow ourselves to return our awareness to the group. Thank you for going on that express train with me, you can see how that meditation, that's the quickest I've ever done that meditation. You can spend so much time going through each individual being separately, and then recognizing that they've all experienced all the suffering of samsara, starting with the sufferings of Avicii hell realm and moving up to the sufferings of the God realms. And so you see why understanding the Lama topics is quite important, because if you understand all the different types of the levels of Lama topics, then they can apply to your meditation on compassion. So even though this is a topic from the great scope, or the being of the great scope, you use elements of meditating on beings from the lesser capacity and medium capacity to inform your meditation and make it more powerful. And so I encourage you to do this meditation on compassion slowly and build it up. And for me, this idea of including the guru, sending their compassion, has been a really powerful addition. You don't need to do that part. But for me, it helps remind me of my own infinite capacity for compassion. So it first helps me start with developing my own renunciation and realizing that there are other beings who wish for me to be free from suffering, and that their wishes are infinite in capacity, and those wishes empower me. So the guru's compassion doesn't create more compassion for me. I already have that seed, that potential, but they remind me of it. So that visualization has been helpful for me in this practice. But if it's a distraction, then, it's not necessary. But I find it helpful, kind of like it recharges me sometimes. Okay, so with that, if there are any questions or comments, we can try to go over. We have a few minutes left before I keep you late. So feel free to speak up if there's anything. No. Excellent. A room of bodhisattvas. No questions. I have questions. I can ask you. Oh, look at you, froze right at the end. Okay, there you are again. Again, a reminder, for this next week, if you have time over the week, I encourage you to read the first chapter from Making Life Meaningful, as well as the 5th article in the handout, which is called Practicing the Good Heart. Again, one more time, I'm going to post both of those in the chat, and the article PDF was in the chat previously. And if you don't have it, you can go to Thupten Norboling's website, go to the website for this class, and there's a link that says course materials. You can download it from there. They also have a number of meditations on love, compassion, seeing the all sentient beings of your mother, and so on, that were developed by a couple different teachers that are really helpful. So they're not the exact same meditations I've been doing, but they're all the same in the end, right? So if you download those can also be very helpful for you. So I encourage that. I encourage you to work throughout the week, try to incorporate this meditation on compassion throughout your week. If there are any questions that come up, write them down. It's really helpful when you're reading a new topic or when you're meditating on a new topic, that as doubts emerge or as insights emerge, to kind of write them down, rejoice in all the progress you're making, and any doubts that come up, use them as an opportunity to meditate and contemplate, and you can bring them to class next week. And that would be great. And
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's in relation to Laksham. I have heard that Laksham is the compassion that arises and that makes you wish to go to help in order to help everybody there. But what does Laksham means in Tibetan? Or
yeah, so Laksam, so the superior intention, when you actually develop superior intention, what it's saying is, I'll commit myself to eliminate the suffering of all sentient beings. And in its most intense form, it's that motivation that says, when I have the ability to help others, I'll stop at nothing to eliminate their suffering. So the willingness to experience all the sufferings of the hell realm yourself to help others, right? Without a moment's hesitancy or doubt. When you actually develop that superior intention, then there's no doubt that you'll do anything you can to help others. So if it's beneficial for you to be reborn in a hell realm over and over again to help others, you'd have no hesitancy in doing that when you actually have Laksam, the superior intention in your mind, when you actually cultivated that mind. So that is how strong it has to be, right? That's the goal, is an intention that not only do I want others to be free from suffering and all the causes, which is compassion, but I take it upon myself to engage in that action. So it's that actual intentionality that's right before proceeding bodhicitta. And it has to be so strong that there's no doubt There's no saying, well, I'd help them if it doesn't hurt me, right? There's no doubt there. So again, in Tibetan, the word is very vague. It just means, hak means excellent or above or superior, and sam means mind. And so they're both general terms. And we use the term haksam in different ways. We say haksam ningje, which is a special intention related to ningje or compassion, which is what's referenced in the 7-point cause and effect. But we also say haksam senke, so haksam in relation to bodhicitta, which is different. And there's laksam dakpe semke, which is the type of bodhicitta that you achieve when you achieve the first bodhisattva ground. So the same term is used in different places with slightly different meanings. So the general meaning is just an excellent mind or superior mind. In this context, it's that intention that has no hesitancy and no unwillingness to experience any suffering yourself for the benefit of others to relieve their suffering. And so that has to come slowly, slowly. But again, we have to be in our real lives, in our everyday life, we have to temper it with our wisdom. So if me putting myself in harm's way is not going to actually be helping others, does not mean you run into every burning building you see. Like, I don't have any skill in saving people from a fire, so I'm not going to go run into every burning building just because I want to help them. If I don't have the actual skillful means to do it, then I'm not going to do it, right? So you have to find that balance of being willing to put yourself on the line to help others, but also realizing what your limitations are, both physical and emotional limitations, and finding that balance. But actual haksam, actual superior intention that's just preceding bodhicitta, is that real dedication that I will do anything I can to eliminate the suffering of others. I take it as my responsibility. And I find joy in that responsibility. It isn't a burden. There's no hesitancy. So that's what it means in the most intense version.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. It's one of these weird terms that it seems very similar to bodhicitta, right? And the truth is it's a stepping stone between great compassion and bodhicitta. But it's taking compassion, which is already active, and it's adding on to that feeling of not only am I going to act in compassion, but I'm going to set the motivation that I will do it for all sentient beings. Like, it's a responsibility that you take upon yourself. And in its fullest form, it's free from all hesitancy and doubt, And so if your practice is going to be free from doubt, it has to have a firm, stable basis that's based not just in blind faith, but in the conviction that these teachings are accurate. And these teachings are accurate representations of reality and the path to Buddhahood. And that faith and that conviction comes from study and practice. And so that's why all the pieces have to come together in order for that special intention to actually develop. Because if you don't have a strong conviction that this is actually the right path to Buddhahood, that this is actually describing the nature of reality, then you're always going to have hesitancy and doubt. Right? So you need to study the whole path and incorporate all different elements into your practice, and they all work synergistically together in that way. So with that, we've gone over a little bit. I apologize very much. Let's just take a moment to dedicate our merit. We realize that by coming together today to study the Holy Dharma, we have created some virtue. By working through the obstacles of monsoon, Indian internet anger. So maybe you guys did. I don't know. I had a little bit of frustration there. That's from me. But hopefully you guys didn't have any. So we've created some virtue. And instead of keeping that virtue for ourselves alone, we dedicate that virtue to all sentient beings. That all sentient beings might be free from all suffering. They might be free from all the suffering of the lower realms, as well as the upper realms. That they might be free from all physical suffering and sickness, as well as the suffering of change and the suffering of all compounded phenomena, the capacity to suffer. So we dedicate that merit. So not only myself alone find happiness, that all sentient beings might experience the infinite, unchanging bliss of Buddhahood. Through this virtue may I swiftly, having gained Guru Buddha state, place each and every sentient being without exception in that state. Precious Supreme Bodhi mind, may it where unborn arise, and where born never decline, but increase forevermore. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate you coming this evening, being part of this course. I rejoice that you all have come and are dedicated to studying the Dharma, and I look forward to seeing you all again next week. Okay? Take care. Have a great
Thank
week.